Hello, everyone. Daniel, very nice to see you here today. Really looking forward to our recording. We connected with you a few months ago, I think, and
Yeah.
I've really been enjoying our conversations about data, about using data to make sure companies have better culture and can create more diverse, more creative, more human-centered cultures. Really looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, it's one of those things where, because it was Lunch Club, I think that we connected, and obviously when you see people's profiles and what they're working on, you say like, oh, there's overlaps, but it's been cool because it's been a case of, like you said, kind of touching base every once in a while and realizing that, in the long run, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of like complementing experiences that are worth, kind of exploring. So.
Yeah, yeah. And, can you please tell a little bit about yourself and what do you do right now?
Yeah, so right now I kind of do a few different things. My main thing is I'm really passionate about people's relationships with data and technology. And so, my background is cognitive science and neuroimaging, but like professionally, it's more analytics, a bit of marketing. Just, even I've done some stuff, in startups, you generally kind of have a lot of different roles you're doing if the team is small. So you'll be customer service as well as marketing, as well as writing blogs, as well as analyzing data from usage and everything like that. So the whole point of what I'm doing, especially with my adaptive thinking, is to try and bring that experience together to kind of help people be a bit more preemptive and establish that as a forethought rather than an afterthought. And then I also am head of data for Centric Lab, which is more about urban health justice and how we can use data to kind of empower people in systems. So yeah, that's a lot of what I do right now.
Yeah, and something that's been really interesting for me in our conversations is this focus we have both on data
Yeah.
and on making sure that we have this human-centered approach. I think you even describe yourself as a human-centered data scientist.
Yeah.
I thought it's really great. I come from experience in employee engagement as an organizational psychologist. I've worked with over 20 UK and multinational companies on their employee engagement strategy, helping them understand how they can use people analytics and data to create better experiences for their people. Because we do spend at least 1/3 of our lives at work, so we want to make sure that we have better experience. And
Completely.
I think what's really important is that we use data to understand what is it that's going on for people in the businesses, but that we also remember that in the end of the day, it's not just about the data, but about actually using it to create more people-centered cultures. And
Yeah.
I think that's been the sort of the main point in our conversations so far.
Agreed.
And Daniel, so uh, one of the topics we've discussed a lot with you last time we spoke was about why is it so important for organizations to be thinking about people analytics right now. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think the thing is that even this year, I did a bit of kind of during the first lockdown and then kind of the summer, really trying to reposition, really trying to look at what are the narratives that are out there about data right now. And what I really feel like is that data is a really good way at creating an internal and external assets and really and holding yourself accountable. And so and having a structure for ethics as well as efficiency. And I think more and more different sectors, so privately, public, like what the government's doing with national data strategy and all that, there's more and more touch points in which people are recognizing that data can be useful for things that aren't just for data people. So if you want to do something that says as simple as I want to make my restaurant accessible, data helps you in do that. If you want to have internal culture to say, I want to make sure my employees all know how to answer this, even if the HR person isn't in, then they have a system in place. And maybe that means a template, maybe that's a dashboard that keeps you updated enough to know I should probably send this email now because this indicator told me this, and that's all data. But it happens now because I think there's becoming more and more tools and more things out there that allow you to be able to like come up with these situations and to be able to have these indicators. And so rather than just building the tools for no use, it's better to actually now start thinking more about what you want to do with the analytics and what impact you actually want to achieve, so that you pick the right tools and you don't like lead with something that's maybe not fit for purpose. So that's, I mean, that would probably be my main premise on why now it's just the accessibility of data and the focus from multiple sectors on data being primary.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really makes me think of this saying. I don't remember top of my mind who said it, but I think it goes like, "In God we trust, everyone else should bring data." And I think that like really makes sense. Like in organizations, if you want to be making better decisions, of course you need data. You cannot just rely, well, sometimes it's important to rely on a gut feel, but you cannot do this for big strategic sort of decisions, right?
Yeah.
And for me, having worked with HR leaders, with talent leaders, with organizational development experts in the talent management field, we often see that there's almost like this, on the one hand, more and more companies fortunately understand that it's important to focus on people analytics, to look at their data, to understand what's going on for their people, and to make more informed decisions. On the other hand, many organizations are still sort of don't realize the importance of using data in this particular domain of focusing on their people. And that's actually like one of those things. It's almost like a new thing. Like when you talk about the importance of data, the importance of people analytics, most people get it like immediately. Oh, okay, got it. But when we think about it, like it's only been like what, 5 years, 7, 8 years that we've been seriously talking about the importance of people analytics and the importance of making sure that HR has the capabilities and the systems in place to be gathering that data, analyzing it, and making decisions based on the data, not just on wherever the wind blows. And I think something that we spoke with you about the other day was like that right now, at the point where we are still having conversations about the importance of people analytics, with so many companies embracing it and so many companies are still lagging behind, it's almost like the sort of Wild West for HR and people leaders at the moment, when there's this understanding, but there's such a big gap between the capabilities in terms of analyzing people data in some organizations, and probably 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll be looking back at this at like 2015, 2020, and thinking like, wow, those were some dark ages when we were only just having conversations about data. But that's really so important for making the right decisions and for making sure that people's strategy is moving forward.
Yeah, and I think one point that just to add that you mentioned about the time lapse is actually something that this year I've reflected a lot on, because I did my cognitive science degree almost like a decade ago, right? And I think even when I was getting academic support, people were kind of saying that it was going to be because the scene wasn't there for these kind of things. They were like, there's not going to be a very linear path in how you build this sort of career, because unless you did make it into a big company that was already playing around with these things. So some of the people that are ahead now were people that were able to be in Google or IBM or Microsoft or something, where they were having dedicated conversations already to start saying, you know what, we've got enough kind of stake and equity to start saying maybe we should start running internal analytics. But because like my work experience since graduation has mostly been like non-for-profit and startups, there's not really a consistent culture around people analytics within small and medium kind of companies for them to be able to say, oh, this is exactly what I need you for, and this is what your actual payment, you know, or KPI or whatever it will be, is making sure that our company or our organization has this. And I think that's probably going to be the big point that you're talking about, that in 10 years time, they're probably going to look and they'll be like, how could someone even have a 10 person company and not have this in place, because there'll probably be like 2 apps that you just, you just log on to, and then all of a sudden, like, most of your analytics that you as a founder need when you get a new hire can just be, can kind of be just documented from that app or something like that. So it will be interesting to see this in reflection in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another important subject around people analytics in particular is the fact that with every individual, like, having their needs, everyone has the different experiences, different stories that they're inevitably bringing into their work, and that's affecting not just their well-being during and outside of their working hours, but also how well they're performing and whether they have the headspace to innovate. It's so important for businesses to make sure that they gather sufficient information to understand what are the individual differences between people, and to understand how they can accommodate for those differences, to really empower high performance and innovation while making sure that people are also having a good and healthy, productive relationship with their work. And something that we've discussed with you, Daniel, was the fact that when we talk about creating a culture that's not just creative and innovative, but also diverse and inclusive, it's important for companies to be gathering that data to understand how are they actually doing with all of those, with different groups, and whether they are genuinely creating a diverse workforce that can innovate, that can work well together, and where they can quickly address if they're perhaps lagging behind in how well and how fairly they're hiring, developing, whether everyone's getting access to the same opportunities within the company.
Right. So I think that that's, for me, my experience even with this has been a lot more in the last year or two. But I think it's actually a very interesting, like, the more I kind of tackle these sort of questions and these sort of discussions, the more I think it really is just an underrated kind of a concept for use of data, because I think, we have so many instances in which you can monitor revenue with data, and you can monitor like the size of your team and all these different things. But what these kind of uses of data have you do is like there's accountability, there's ethics, there's actually an idea that maybe I want to know what the sexual preference of everyone in my organization is, but that's actually a lot of trust to get that to happen. So me as an organization, we have to be better to be able to get to a point where we build that culture where people trust us enough to give that data. So it's almost like you accomplish multiple goals by actually setting up an inclusive and diverse culture, because it's not just the fact that you actually can monitor things well, but it means that people that you're paying, people that are in your jurisdiction, actually trust you to a certain degree. And so I think, and that's really important. And it's the work that I've kind of engaged in different aspects. For instance, there's the Know Your Data campaign from YSYS, and the whole idea of that was specifically within the venture capital space and the startup space in the UK, get baselines and people to commit to just baselines. So nothing super intense to say, I commit to having X amount of Black people or Black women or trans people or whatever it is, but it's actually just a commitment to say, I'm going to start collecting this data. And what we want to see is over the time, maybe 3 months, 6 months, etc., of those that committed, what were even the bumps that came in? What kind of things can you then talk to an organization down the line and say, whoa, was it really tricky for you to get half of these questions answered? What does that actually say about the ecosystem of your organization to begin with? Because there'll be a number of organizations that we've already started to see that it was very easy, more or less. Like there was just people already trusted them. Maybe they were just a very cohesive team, or maybe they had that sort of interaction. And so producing the data was easy. And then for others, they've still probably got some apprehension because what people viewed as work wasn't the ability to share that. They just, someone got in and just happy to get in the door, you know, and so they're like, they're not trying to like stick up for all black men or, you know, trying to do anything like that. They just kind of like, I just want to get in and do the work. But it is important to actually have this data be collected and talked about, and to get past the level of just having a workshop, but making something where a new hire could come in, and if you talk to that new hire 2 weeks in or a month in, they can tell you something reliably about like how comfortable they feel, the resources they have, and it's not just for them, but it's just their resources, and if they happen to need some of them, they'll use it.
Yeah, and I think there you mentioned this very important point of trust in organizations, that like to ask employees about to share data about their background, about their preferences in the diversity and inclusion context. That already requires a lot of trust between employees and their employer who's asking them those questions. And the fact that they're even gathering this data can tell a lot of, it's almost like the second order consequence of that is that you get to test the levels of trust in the business, how likely people are reply to those questions.
That's exactly it.
And I think something else that's very interesting with those is that it's not enough to just ask, to do a survey like that, to gather that information once for a business to say that it's committed to creating a diverse and inclusive workforce. In fact, it's a long-term process, because something that I have seen from employee survey data, when you collect diversity and inclusion related data over several years, is that sometimes, like say in the first year, you ask a few questions about how do you think business is doing around hiring, around unconscious bias. You're testing for those things. Okay, you ask this, you get the results. The results are like all right there along the global benchmarks. The business thinks, okay, good, fair enough. Seems like we're doing all right, but let's invite a few consultants, do a few trainings, understand a bit better what's going on with unconscious bias, all of those things. Let's talk about it. They do that. Next year, they collect the data again. They ask the same questions to compare, and the results go down. The scores are less favorable now. So the business is asking, like, what's happening here? And then they ask like the survey provider, like, is there something with the questions? Why is that happening? You promised us the survey will help us with our diversity and inclusion awareness and situation, what's going on? But actually, the data is showing that now probably there is more awareness. When they collected the data the first time, people didn't have enough awareness. They just weren't thinking about it enough, perhaps, before they had the training following the survey. So when the second time they're asked, they're actually more aware. So in a way, less is more. In a way, thanks to tracking the data over a longer period of time, you can understand that the worse the results are, probably the more awareness that there is. And that's when you can actually start doing some work and transforming the culture.
Yeah, it's like, it makes me think of like exercise, right? Like there's a certain level of, if you just go for occasional runs and someone asks you like, oh, are you in shape? Are you fine? You'd probably say that, yeah, if I could run for 15 minutes straight, whatever, that's fine. And you're doing no other testing, no other real thing. And then you get like a personal trainer or go to a gym or do something like that, where a treadmill is actually telling you how much you're running and you're getting to see your heart rate and stuff like that. And then you start saying like, whoa, actually that 15-minute jog really isn't putting me, like if I start talking to other people, it's not really putting me actually in what I consider a super fit state. It's just enough for me to get by. But then once you know, then you're like, actually what my definition of in shape and fit might be is probably more numbers based. It's probably more based on an actual national or of a specific demographic that I desire to be in standard, you know. So it is kind of that weird kind of valley as you're talking about, whereas if you didn't think about it as one, you didn't look, you'd probably get through most of your life or most of your whatever just saying, my benchmark is simply that I'm not too out of breath when I run for 15 or 20 minutes. But obviously the difference between the exercise and these kind of diversity and inclusion in a company is that your exercise is your personal thing, and you're the only one that gets the benefit or the downsides most of that. Whereas for these, if you're ignorant to people, the 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 that you have jurisdiction over, it doesn't just hurt you, it hurts them. It's the reason why a good hire, a good person might not be able to comfortably tell you why they wanted to leave, but they will leave anyway. And they might not even be able to have a word for it because, you know, they don't know specifically what it is, but they just know for some reason every time holidays come around, they get more uncomfortable, and they and they don't know the sort of thing, but they're also like, oh, I don't get to see my family, and there's no forum to even bring that up. So I'm just going to go to somewhere that allows me to see my family over the holidays. And, you know, and you only know that on the exit interview, which is no good for your actual business. So yes, I think it is really interesting though.
Yeah, it's like you cannot know what you cannot know, and without data you'll never know what is it that you don't know, so that you can then address it.
That's exactly it.
So, like, based on your experience working with data, what do you think companies can do right now to improve their situation, to develop stronger, more human-centered cultures using data?
I think the biggest thing is definitely to be realistic about putting a time of your strategy and your development into just listening, right? And to making realistic benchmarks and starting points that are not shooting for the moon, not saying that we've just heard a number that some talk has said about how many of these people you need or how many ramps you need or whatever, and we're just going to stick with that. Actually be able to talk to people that are already within your organization, and then, as you talked about, consultants and stuff like that, maybe bring that in after, because it actually helps the consultants work if you have actually been able to talk to your own company. But I think if you start with that and then being able to say what are like quantitative and qualitative sort of benchmarks that are just very early and very easy and very representative of the level of trust and information you want to gather from the beginning, make a strategy for that. And if you do have the skills within it to develop that strategy, then cool, but also realize that it doesn't say anything shameful about your company or organization if you do have to get external help for that, you know, because there are people that dedicate their time to the nuance of asking questions and the nuance of what to do with information and how to develop trust with people. You know, because anyone, you know, like you said, you got a background in psychology as well, like there is a section of that just devoted to things like experimental design to talk about the efficacy of, like, if you ask this now, did you ask this person around the time when you're about to pay them, or did you give them, you know, some leeway to say you can be honest and it's not going to affect your ability to be in this job after next week? Because even little things like that you don't know you're doing could make you start on the wrong foot, because every person thinks that if they don't answer truthfully or they don't answer to the way you want to hear, they're going to be replaced because they consider themselves like an intern or entry level, not a director or someone that can't afford to be lost. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest thing, is very much just before the data even comes in, making sure the premise of why you're collecting it, what the impact you want to achieve, and like kind of the ego-free just assessment of where you're at is solid and in place before you start thinking about the surveys themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this sort of brings us back to the question of trust in organizations, whether there is enough trust to start having those conversations and to start gathering this data so that you can have more effective conversations, gather more effective data. So it's almost like a vicious circle that you need to break first if there's no trust in the organization, if it's not immediately as people focused as we want the companies of the future to be, then there's a challenge around gathering the information. Like, you're sending out a survey to your employees, or you're inviting them for a focus group, and they're like, yeah, sure, you just say you believe in having a great culture, but like, we don't really believe you.
Yeah.
That's something that organizations need to overcome by sort of taking those baby steps of understanding first, like, let's run this survey, understand what's going on, act on the results, do
That's
something about it.
it.
Let's not do too much, just like 2 or 3 points. Usually that's the best recommendation for survey, just like 2-3 action points, because otherwise you cannot do everything and you cannot communicate that you're doing all of those things. Do that, see the impact, slowly be creating this culture of listening, healthy feedback in the organization, trust, culture of being able to speak up. And then over the time, that's how you can get this more productive, healthier, high performing culture.
Right, because it's a relationship. It's like it's a culture, not a campaign, right? So in a culture, you can prioritize things and say, these are the 2 or 3 things that we are going to focus on first, but it doesn't mean we don't see the other things. It just means that we need to act, and we want to act effectively, not in a way where we start taking 20 points on which people care about and saying we're going to try and spread ourselves thin and maybe only do them half as well. So you've got only 5% focus on physical ability, 10% on like mental health in terms of tasks, 10% then on race or ethnicity, etc. And then you end up failing on all those fronts, rather than just saying, we want to build that trust, we want to have an avenue, and we'll pick these big things that maybe 40% or 60% of the company really cares about right now. And because also by delivering that properly and doing that well, it does do parts to develop the trust to do the other things. So if your company's already said, well, okay, it seems like childcare was an issue, and inclusivity of prayer and something else, and wow, I saw you do a survey, have some focus groups, implement something and ask us about it, and then it worked out well for the people that wanted it, then I feel comfortable that whatever I'm going to put forward next is going to get heard and acted on as well. So you're kind of building, it is a cycle. So once you break it and you create a new cycle, if done properly, it will just be kind of perpetuating and self-fulfilling in itself, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I think what you said there, like, you put it very well. It's about culture, it's not a campaign. When you just like do it once, oh, we tried, didn't quite work, not our fault, there must be something with our people, kind of thing. And that's unfortunately, like, I've seen some companies actually have that sort of attitude. Like, some leaders have this attitude, like, well, we asked them all the questions, like a consultant came in, they told us to ask this bunch of questions, we asked it, we looked at a few numbers, like, for an hour, nothing happened. Yeah, there must be something wrong with the process. Well, that's because it needs to be about the longer term. But I think it's also important to understand what sort of things can be done, like right now, like today, in the next few months, to make sure that companies can start gathering the data and can start having those conversations about people-centered, high-performing cultures. What would be your, I guess, like, one or a few suggestions for companies that are thinking about starting gathering people analytics to create better cultures?
Yeah, I think it can, depending on obviously on how far the company is already with this kind of work and the relationship they have. I think there's probably like 2 or 3 main starting points that I would do. I'd say that if you're in a case where you're like, one option is obviously to just even have an event, a workshop or something where it's either about the company, and so it's more about participation from the workers, or you get someone that's qualified to lead it and run it and say, I have experience, and the fact that even your company decided to bring me in is already something that you should consider important and trustworthy. So this is my open recommendation to your company and to you as well, so we all have it on record. Having that sort of event to kind of kickstart it and say, before we're even going to collect something, we just want to say we are trying to listen past the point of listening, not doing anything. But by bringing this person in or by setting up this workshop, there's a clear call to action to say, we're going to send you a survey in 2 weeks. Please fill that out properly, because this is our touch point to be able to begin something with you. So be able to do something like that is probably, if there's no clear indicator, if you've not done any work on it before, anything like that, is what I would consider that you can do now. Because especially as we're recording this and it's going into the holidays and everything like that, like I think there are some really good times to just be able to say, we're going to go into a new year, we're going to go into a new quarter, etc. And we want to be able to make sure that we're good for the future. So if there's something not too committal, that because the thing is, you also don't want to ask too much of them without the trust already being there. So you don't want them to say like, we want you to do 3 hours of this, and then you're going to fill out like a 20-minute survey and you want to do this, when they're like, I don't even know if you're going to do anything with that yet. So keep it to like maybe one clear point, to saying that the part of it is actually building a relationship in the first place and just seeing how that resonates. And then what you can build from that information, and then decide if you need external help or if it's something that you actually have a qualified team internally to do. So that would be kind of my recommendation. It's just to get that conversation started with a call to action at the end.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is spot on. It's about having that initial communication and making sure that there's this openness and transparency in communication with you, saying perhaps even like, look, we like this survey is important for us, and we will make sure that all the data is treated with utmost respect, and we're really going to do something with it, and maybe even acknowledge, like before, maybe it wasn't like really ideal how we dealt with those surveys. We're keen to listen. We're keen to understand how in the new year, in the new quarter, in the new life for our company, right? We are going to make it. We are going to make it better. Like, because if a company is really serious about changing its organizational culture, then it does need to collect the data, and it does need to make sure that it's keeping itself, that it makes itself people focused, and that people actually believe in that.
And they play a part. So that's another thing, is that it might be a case of actually saying people can have a role in that change, because I think this is what happens wrong sometimes with governments, right? Where you've got local authorities, you've got even lower than that, etc. But then you don't necessarily include them in a strategy that you thought was going to be for the people or to help the people. And then they just feel that disconnect. So you're usually going to be in a company with adults, right? And they're already going to have responsibilities for their work and everything like that. So again, bringing the floor to them actually might tell you that you don't have to do that much work as a company. Really, it's all about just enabling and just saying that if you just don't inhibit these people, or you trust them when they say something and put in a request, then you don't actually have to build a new system or do anything that radical. You've already got people that are active about that change. You just need to make sure that they just want acknowledgement that the company will back them rather than harm them when they try and do what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And starting with baby steps, with providing as much anonymity as possible, perhaps, and as many safe spaces as possible, and understanding how this can be done, because sometimes company may not always be able to provide something that we can call a safe space for its employees, but understanding the importance of this and having this mutual understanding between the leadership, between HR, between every single employee, that's the case and that's the direction for the company, is so important. And communication and trust, as we've been discussing, is key in that. And, Daniel, it's been such a pleasure as always talking to you about data, about creating people-centered cultures. Can you share a bit about how can people get in touch with you, and perhaps a little bit about 𝗏𝗏 thinking?
Yeah, so as I touched on earlier, the whole point of 𝗏𝗏 thinking is I've come to terms with the fact that I'm probably always going to be doing multiple things at the same time, right? But that's kind of the beauty of being interested in people's relationships with technology, data, etc., is that there's just so many different use cases and so many roles that you can be in getting that to exist. And even though I've got these roles, like I said, in Centric and all that, the whole idea of 𝗏𝗏 thinking was to say, I really want to address that gap in between founders and people that are making key decisions, and what their actual practice. Like I realized it wasn't just the strategy, but you do actually have to work on the culture for them to be able to build the strategy and to make the right decisions in the future. So the whole point of adaptive thinking is to kind of say, here's a way in which I can help people with some quick tips, be able to do one-on-one, be able to do trainings, workbooks, etc. And something to just make it focus on the accessibility and focus on the point that there's not going to be just a load of founders that say, because I'm not myself a psychologist, I'm not a data scientist, I don't have a chief ethics officer or chief data officer, this is just not my area, not my domain. But to realize that data is an asset, data is something that when you have the right culture around it, doesn't just give you a competitive edge. Like I don't like to think of it as just you're using this for sales, you're using this for whatever. It's the fact that you said, like you said, this is 1/3, sometimes, almost 1/2 of many people's lives. So getting something that's freely available to be part of the culture positively for people's lives, it just makes a better society. So, and a better society, people that are treated better, that are understood better, will be more productive on their own rights. They will be better contributing members of society. So the whole point of adaptive thinking is to just say, let me focus on setting that culture up and approaching the people that don't normally think that they're going to be able to get this done and have this in place, and just help them with the decision making. So by the time they get to the point where they need to make a website, they need to have a market entry kind of strategy, they need to hire a team, anything along those lines, they can say, you know what, when I'm hiring you, this is already our values, these are our ethics. We went to an outside person before we reached you to be able to build this document that says this is clearly where you're going to work and how you're going to help us and what you're going to be part of the team. And here are some things that you can contribute to or change about how we understand you, how we interact with you. And that forum is just going to be created. And so the whole idea is that I do that training, but then I also work with partners, which are going to be people that are more on the delivery side, that maybe are people that just focus on specific forms of data acquisition or data delivery, and be able to say, I trust these people to also help you, because these people are in the same philosophical kind of category where they understand that you don't just do this just to sell, but your little thing of social listening, your little thing of making websites but accessible follows that same path, where someone does this and they're not messing someone else up, they're not closing doors to people that need to be helped, but you're making one big ecosystem where you're becoming a better ethical company. Because my last point on this is that we're in an age now where there's so many ways in which people can see reviews on you, that I do this myself. When I use companies that it feels like their customer support were well informed, were courteous, they have a good system in place, it seems like just the general culture of what they're doing with data, how they're communicating with each other, and how they're helping me as a customer is all in line, I will go online and say good things about them. I will specifically say, like, this was the interaction that was good. It seemed like you guys have everything in check. And then obviously vice versa if it doesn't happen. So I think it's like there are many ways in which having this analytics and having this culture and having this awareness of what you're doing internally will build into things that become beneficial externally. So I guess my main thing now, my main focus is approaching avenues where people are supporting businesses that are trying to form what they are now, like they're not too far down the line, and they actually want to make sure that they're ethical and efficient. It's just to be able to get those workshops and those workbooks to exist, and to be able to make these bespoke sort of solutions for people that involves a lot of listening and a lot of practical, what do you do next?
Cool. I really like what you say there about creating this ecosystem where I guess all the complexity of the different angles that every business and every individual is bringing out there to the world is integrated and connected by data and by the overall philosophy and psychology of creating better cultures and treating each other well.
That's exactly it.
Wonderful. So as for me, I can be contacted on LinkedIn or through my website, Business Purpose Coaching. Also, check out my YouTube channel, Business Purpose, for more conversation recordings with leaders in neuroscience, organizational change consulting, people, talent, HR field. And as for me, my expertise is in employee engagement, organizational psychology, and right now I also run trainings for startups and scale-ups, helping them make sure that their managers and senior leaders have the coaching skills to make sure that they can ensure best possible experience for their people as they're growing and creating the future they want to create. Thank you everyone for listening today. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to see where we both take these things in the future as well. And I'm sure that we're probably going to look back on this in a month, and we're going to have some partnership or some way in which we've brought our fields, our minds, our people together. So, that's the fun part about all this, is that it's not a matter of competition. It's a matter of just different angles of how we're trying to make that same change.
Absolutely.